first of all, thanks for having me, and also very nice the first talk. I hope we all get into GitOps very soon, although I'm not sure it's going to be that easy for everyone. My name is Gabriel Cismondi, and I'm going to be talking about compliance and velocity in the enterprise. So actually, kind of close to the first talk in a way. So a bit about myself. I've been working in the last few years mainly with scale-ups and fast-paced environments, and I recently, roughly 1 year ago, joined HSBC because I kind of wanted to help them through their move to the cloud. So there's a lot of challenges in there, and I'm very passionate about kind of trying to solve problems at scale. So what is compliance? I guess we all know what compliance is, but I just wanted to touch on that because it's very important to understand that compliance is nothing more than just satisfying certain requirements, and there are many types of requirements really that can come from regulations, security, especially when it comes to cloud and infrastructure. Those can be around infrastructure security, application security, infrastructure patterns to protect what we do, data protection, and all those kind of things. So being compliant just means we satisfy the requirements, and we with those requirements we are sure that we're managing risk in the proper way. So sorry, what's velocity instead? Velocity is speed and direction. So basically, as a company, when we have a roadmap and we want to deliver against that roadmap, the speed we have in delivering certain features and in achieving certain milestones, that's what we can consider as velocity. So it's not big news that velocity hasn't been the most important thing for big enterprises in the past, because they tend to have kind of a slightly different approach when we think compared to startups. But it's increasingly becoming an important thing, because we are seeing every day disrupting startups that are leveraging technology and their kind of freedom in building and doing things very fast, and those startups eventually get big, and they are threatening many of the big companies we're working with. If we think about, for example, healthcare or also insurance is a very good example. Many small companies are now kind of pushing very hard in that sector. So velocity is becoming increasingly important. So unfortunately, what we tend to see is that the bigger the risk, the lower the velocity is. And when I think about risk in this case, is not just security risk or data loss risk or things like that, but also I factor in complexity as well, because the bigger a company is, the easier it is to have a very big blast radius if we do something wrong. So working in a complex environment with complex infrastructure and very complex application is also part of the risk. So but why is that why is that velocity is impacted by risk? What's the problem in all this process? This is something that's very interesting for me. The whole thing between the comparison between small companies and enterprises. And what I found in the past is that generally, when you're in a startup, you have a very easy way, ideally, using GitOps or any other continuous integration technique. But you have an idea, you develop, you build, it works, you deploy, maybe you test, not always, but something gets live pretty fast. And I was trying to replicate this kind of workflow for the enterprise, and I just went out of memory, really, because when you think about getting something done in a big company, an enterprise company, you have architects boards, you have application design boards, security boards, risk assessment, cloud design, compliance, data governance. In the past, I found also that sometimes you also have to get the approval of someone that's higher up, that's been around the company for a long time, and all of this without even factoring budgets, execution time, delivery time, deployment process. It's very complicated, really. And now the thing is, it seems terrible, when we look at this list and we think about everything that's involved. Seems very bad, although there's a reason why, and the reason is risk is not going away. So risk needs to be managed and mitigated. And when you think about, for example, companies in healthcare or companies in the financial sector, you don't really want to be giving your money or giving your health data to a company that potentially will move fast and break things. So with this, I just want to clarify that I'm not saying that all startups break things. There are very good startups, they don't break anything. But in general, I'm just saying, the approach of managing risk is very different. So considering the risk is not going away, there's somehow we have to manage it. And what I found and what is going on in many enterprises is that we need to understand that velocity is one of the outcomes we want, not the only one, but one of the outcomes we want. But that's just an outcome. It's not something we can change. We need to instead work on risk management and compliance to make them more adaptive, to make them faster in a way, right? And we can approach the problem with kind of a DevOps mindset, I guess. So what does a DevOps mindset in this context mean? So as always, I kind of tend to analyze the things when it comes to DevOps, breaking them down into 3 cornerstones of DevOps, right? So culture, measurement, and automation. So by the way, I tend to include sharing as a part of culture. So one of the things that many companies are doing now is going through their digital transformation journey, trying to become very agile. They're doing a lot to review their processes, internal processes, that big list we've seen before. They're trying to upskill people and unify control functions, although it's not that easy. And that's part of the cultural change, and really there's no much we can do on that side rather than trying to do those things, right? There's no technology helping us. It's really applying practices and changing the way people say things. What is interesting though is that instead in the measurement and the automation side, that's really, those are the 2 layers where technology can help us a lot, and especially the cloud in this case, right? And when I mean cloud, really, having worked with companies that tend to have hybrid kind of architectures, or sometimes multi-cloud architectures, I think about the cloud as everything that can be automated, everything that has APIs, and that can be abstracted in a way. So I'm not talking just about public cloud. So what can we do? There are certain things that we can do, such as in the measurement space, we can understand what the risks are and define them. First of all, because if we can't measure and if we can't really come up with a structured way to tackle the problem, it's very difficult to improve, right? So understand what risk is and how to measure it, and then monitor compliance. So are we sticking to all the patterns that we need to comply with so that we can mitigate those risks? And most important things, and I think this is something where companies are getting better and better, but there's still a lot to do, is compliance. Just approaching the problem from a DevOps point of view means that compliance is not just for a team or for a bunch of people to look after. It's something that needs to be visible and shareable, and needs to belong to everyone in the process, to developers, to people in operation. Everyone is an owner of compliance. And on the automation side, there's a bunch of things we can do, which are compliance as code, continuous compliance. We can try to create compliance CI/CD steps, automate remediation, work around notifications and alerts. So all of these things now are very easy to achieve thanks to APIs and everything that the cloud providers are offering us. So I'm going to touch on a few of those things. So compliance automation, this is something that I think it's very, very important. And I've seen it, coming up many times, and I think it's going to be definitely one of the areas that are going to be, again, coming up in the next few years. Is we have to unpack the whole idea we had of compliance as a we thought of compliance as a big monster. It's something that we have to before and after check and make sure that we're okay, and that's why we have all those processes in the middle, right? Instead, if we unpack compliance and we try to integrate compliance at every single step in our CI/CD pipelines, that makes things much easier, because suddenly compliance is not like a big monster, but it's something that can be done in a very small step. And to give you an example, this is one of the things. This actually, I've seen it working, and I think it's fantastic. Having libraries that, for example, integrate all you need from a compliance perspective, and abstract it from the developer and give to the developer or to the DevOps engineer or to the operation people just the tool that you can easily use and integrate in your pipelines. It's very powerful. In this case, I've kind of abstracted. This is some pseudocode, of course, but when you're building a container image, something as simple as building an image, in the background could be doing much more. Could be building the image from the Docker file, scanning it, in case of success or failure, notify the pipeline, to continue or to stop, but also all that attached to an audit service that it's auditing the whole process step by step. So that's pretty powerful, and it's such a simple thing that many of you might be thinking that yes, this is a small thing, and it is, but can be a game changer when you apply this type of philosophy to any one of the steps inside your work process. So another thing is, and again, that this might seem a very, very simple thing, but I've been working with companies in the past that had really bad management of user accounts and permissions, and we ended up in very weird situations in which you don't really want to be. So I think now all the platforms are giving us all the tools to manage things at scale in a standard way, and we have to centrally manage our accounts, define all the permissions based on roles, and everything needs to be as code. It's almost silly to say it, but it's very important. And manage users in a way that's always the same. Now, I wanted to, I'm not sure you can see my screen. So one thing I wanted to touch on, I'm not sure if you've seen AWS organizations, for example. I'm sorry if I mention AWS, but that's where I have the most experience. So AWS organization is one very it's very easy to create accounts that are in a certain hierarchy. I've already done this before, so we don't have to go through the whole process, but I have my root account here. I created a secondary account. You can attach certain policies to that account, which is pretty important. In this case, for example, I have a full access policy and a test policy. The secondary account has been given just the test policy. Let me just double check. Yeah, correct. So this test policy, for example, is just giving access to Cert Manager in AWS. So if I log in the other account, which I already did, of course, and I try to access resources, you can see I have a bunch of permissions errors for all the resources I try to access. And when I go to the resource that's allowed, then I can work on that. So so that's a very simple thing, but very important thing, very powerful thing that we need to make sure we do. And that's just one thing we can do in the cloud, but then we have more important things or equally important things such as compliance as code and continuous compliance, which means we don't think of compliance as something that needs to be reviewed by a human, but it's actually a set of rules that we can write, that we can effectively write as anything else, as as our infrastructure, as our applications. We can write our compliance rules. We can create auto-remediation actions for those rules. We can define when and who and what to notify on, and also define what acceptance looks like. So if having a low risk compliant breach is acceptable for a week, then that's fine. We can, the most important thing, as I was saying before, we can measure it and we can decide what to do with it. And then, again, make compliance accessible to everyone through dashboard. I wanna touch again, I'm almost at the end of my presentation. So I wanna touch on one of these things, for example, and I'm sorry I couldn't show more, but I've configured, let me go to my browser before. So in my AWS account, I'm using, by the way, can you all see the screen well? Should I make it bigger? All right, so I've defined a rule, for example, in my config account, which is a very simple rule. As I was saying before, the fact that these rules are, we can apply them and write them as a code is very, very important, because it means we can replicate them very easily. I can, at every moment in time, just see what my rules are from a code point of view. This is the same rule that we were looking at, but through the console. And this rule is a very, very simple rule that basically is scanning my images and is showing if there is anything that's non-compliant. For this rule, I have specified a certain IMI I want instances to be started from, and I have an instance that's been started from a different IMI. So that means my instance is not compliant. I can, once again, this is very simple to set up, but also very powerful. I can also eventually attach to my rules remediation actions if I want to, even automatic ones. And that's kind of where we want to get, right? That's part of the outcome. So just to close this, the whole presentation, the outcomes of doing this, doing these things is actually, first of all, enabling developers to be more free, but in a controlled space, because we know, we're in a high risk environment, so we don't want them to do everything they want. We can start seeing compliance as a living thing, as I was showing. We spin up an instance and we can see straight away if it's compliant or if it's not compliant. We can mitigate risk in a way that's replicable, so we can do it the same way for every account we spin up, for every resource we create, because it's code and it's version, it's replicable. So we can reduce the amount of processes and the steps that are controlled by humans in those processes, which is very important, because that really makes things much faster. Eventually takes away some of those points in the bullet list I've showed before. And at the end, what it does really, all this approach to compliance, it really does increase velocity, because effectively takes away some of the manual work and makes things easier, and we can approach them in a more agile way. And I think that's it. So thanks a lot. I'll go back to the first page, because there were my Twitter account and my LinkedIn account if you want to connect. And if you have any question.
Yep, so we've got a few questions in the Q&A. The first one is, how would you describe the security of data on the platform? I'm
not sure I understand the question, but I can try to answer that. So data lives as everything else lives in certain resources, whether they are volumes in the cloud or anything else. And even for those objects, we can apply a set of rules that you want to check on. Of course, we want to make sure that everything on those drives is encrypted, for example, and we can check that. If it's something is not encrypted, it's going to show up as non-compliant. Or we can also manage encryption at rest and in transit, and everything is really once again, we can monitor it through compliance rules.
Okay, brilliant. And then Claudio has said, how do you think the several bank boards you mentioned should integrate in order to speed up the pipeline for speed from a process perspective?
That's a very interesting one. It's not an easy one, because I think especially while we're in a migration period, there's still a lot of on-prem things and like kind of things that are not in the cloud yet, and there is a bunch of stuff that now is in the cloud. So it's difficult we can't just get rid of some of these steps in the process. But I think what many organizations are trying to do is just, as I was saying before, upskilling people so that they have the whole picture and they can, so that the process can kind of converge to certain important steps. Also, another thing that's very important is trying to see the whole process from a customer perspective. So it means if I'm a developer or a team and I want to get something in the cloud, rather than having to go individually to each one of the members and follow each one of the steps, I kind of give my idea, my design, my document what I want to do, and there is this kind of organ that takes care of somehow getting through the process. This is one of the directions I think many companies are taking.
Okay. Brilliant.